Hey Jake, how are you?
Good, Kevin, and yourself?
Good, good, good. So you didn't have any problems getting on?
No, no issues.
Well, it looks like it's just going to be us here. Um,
Which is all
that's
right
okay.
because this is recorded and I have heard from a few people that they are watching these. They do see them when they get a minute, and
Yeah,
that's nice.
yeah. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, these are really just quick shots about various topics. Just and they're just informational, and it's to give people just a sense of how things run, should run, how they don't run, all that sort of stuff. And one of those things that obviously, we saw at last council meeting and geez, so many others is that they don't run very well. Um, and really, I think I, from what I hear people complain about is, well, things just keep getting talked and talked and talked about over and over and over again with no result.
Right.
Whether that's from meeting within a meeting or meeting to meeting, it just goes on and on and on. These things that keep coming up over and over again, and I think that's a really important uh, issue, right? Because you know, ultimately, you guys on council, I mean, what you're doing is project management, right? You're taking issues that come before you, and you're saying, well, what do we do with this? How do we solve this? And then you go about the issue of solving those. You go about the process of solving those issues, and some things are easy, but other things really take some planning and take some calculated gathering of resources and wherewithal, and that sort of thing. So really at the heart of these meetings is this thing of the motion, and that's why I was going to do a different topic, and then uh, after the last thing, I said, you know what, I'm going to zero in on the motion because that is a really essential thing. Last meeting just reminded me how essential that these things are,
Yeah.
and I think ultimately, um, a meeting that doesn't run by motion is a meeting that isn't conducting business. Right? You could talk, but a motion is about business. We're going to do something to address this problem, this issue, or something. And so you do that by putting an action plan on the table. And it could be something simple like, I move to, give Wendy $1,300 for truck tires, right? That's a motion on the table. You vote it up, you vote it down, or you amend it, right? So motions
Right.
are actually a very simple thing. And I think one of the things um, that I would hope that you all would remember is that you're all co-equal council people, and uh, each of you has an opportunity to lay something on the table regarding an issue, and when you do that, then that motion that you lay on the table in a well-run meeting gets resolved one way or another. It gets resolved at that meeting. And so, one of the problems that we have here with this council is that there's not a formal agreement to use a parliamentary process such as Robert's Rules of Order. You know what that is, Robert's Rules?
No.
So, Robert's Rules is a parliamentary program that's been around since the late 1900s. It's adopted by organizations from boardrooms to government agencies. And it basically says this is how you run a meeting, right? This is how we run a meeting democratically, fairly. This is how we have order. We take turns speaking, we vote on things by reminding that person of Robert's Rules of Order. Now, chair should know how meetings should run according to Robert's rules. So the problem that we have really is that the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs recommends that councils follow Robert's Rules of Order, but they can't compel it. It's not in the statute. Borough Code doesn't require it. So basically, Robert's rules are followed kind of loosely through convention. Uh, but Robert's rules itself actually says, sometimes you got to deviate. That's fine. You just have to call it as you see it sometimes, but these are the rules that we agree to follow. So one of those bedrock rules is this thing about emotion. So according to Robert's rules, let me back up just 1 second. The fact that we don't have Robert's rules as an official parliamentary guide in the borough in my opinion, is a bit of a problem, because we will never agree without that, we will never agree on procedures. Who gets to talk, who doesn't, when things are voted on, how they're voted on. There's no guiding principle, right? How to
Now,
conduct business.
is that a required thing that we have to have Robert's rules?
No. It's not required by statute. The Borough Code doesn't require it. The Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs strongly recommends, and most people actually do follow some form of Robert's rules. Most organizations, governments, boardrooms, nonprofits, and so forth, but it's not required. So there are boroughs across the state who have actually adopted. And so I have a really nice resource I found. It's a resolution from Elizabeth Borough, and they adopted a whole resolution on decorum for public meetings. And so this is actually what I was going to do. Let me share my screen. I was going to actually do this topic.
Now, I think I know where this is getting. I've watched a couple videos of actual, really professional, I guess you should say, boroughs and the way that they hold their meetings.
Mhm.
And it's quick and simple.
Yeah.
They go right down the list of things that need to be said or done, and then
Right.
kind of go from there.
Right. Yeah. And that is really the point of Robert's rules. It's to make your meetings efficient and effective, not get bogged down with, all kinds of crazy side conversations and tangents and things like that. Right. So here on the screen here, this is a resolution from Elizabeth Borough. And so they agreed to adopt a whole range of things, including Robert's rules. And it says in here somewhere where Robert's rules is the thing. So basically, the Borough of West Mayfield is not under any obligation to follow Robert's rules unless they put themselves under the obligation to follow Robert's rules, right? So when it comes back to this thing like how motions are handled, it's going to continue to be a free for all. And it'll just continue also to be at the whim of the current president, right? Who is the chair? Robert's rules would call that person the chair. Here we call that person the president of council, who basically functions as a chair, right?
Yes.
Opens the meeting, runs through the agenda, handles business, yada, 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 right? So if that person doesn't know how to conduct a meeting, Robert's rules or not, we can see what kind of a train wreck that it could be. So if Wendy says, she's out looking at the trucks, we need new truck tires, right? So she knows that this expense is coming up, and it's an expense that council will have to vote on because perhaps it's above the monetary threshold or so forth. So Wendy would come to the meeting and she would say, hey, you know what? I need new truck tires. So I move that we buy new truck tires for $1,300, and puts it on the table. So that is on the table. So one of the greatest things about the Robert's Rules of Order process of motions is that no other business takes place until you solve that motion, right? I should say you resolve that motion, right? So you cannot have side tangents. You can't start talking about this topic and that topic. It has to be on point until that motion is resolved. So if Wendy says, look, I move that we spend $1,300 for truck tires, and somebody says, okay, I second it. Okay. So Robert's rule says, okay, now we'll open this up to discussion. We have a motion on the floor, and that motion will be discussed. And the order is a chair, right, would impose this order, would go right around the room. What do you have to say? What do you have to say? What do you have to say? Right. And nobody speaks while other people are speaking. Right.
Right.
Now, this is the discipline that a good chair has to impose on a meeting when there's a motion on the table, right? So everybody gets a chance, and nobody gets to speak again until everybody has spoken, right? That's a part of Robert's rules, that everybody gets a fair chance to say their piece, right? So
Yep.
someone might say, look, I'd like to amend the motion to we'll spend up to $2,000, right? And so Robert's rules is, if someone wants to amend the main motion on the floor, that amendment motion has to be taken up. So here we go again, right? Okay. Well, I don't think it's necessary. We can spend 2,000. We should stick to 1,300. Okay. Thank you, Jake. What do you have to say? Okay, Eli. What do you have to say? Boom, boom, boom. Right. And that motion. Okay. There's a motion to amend the motion. Let's take a vote on that, and if everybody votes down that, then it gets voted down. Back to the
Right.
main motion, right? So when you're at that main motion, when you go around the horn or you're just sick of discussing it, you can call the question, as they say. That's the phraseology. I'm going to call the question, right? The chair could say, okay, I'm going to call the question on this, and you take a vote, right? And so the motions break in three ways. They either are voted up, they're voted down, or they're tabled, right? So, voting up, voting down, that's, it lives or it dies, right? That's
Yeah.
very simple. To table a motion just means that you're going to put it off, right? So you could actually say, well, look, someone could interject and say, look, I vote that we table this until we get other bids or
Sure.
we look around, okay? And so that motion doesn't die, it just gets tabled for the next meeting, for example. And usually you have to spell that out. So let's table this until the next meeting. We'll get a full report and we'll come back. So when you come back to the next meeting, that's what old business is. Old business is, hey, remember we were talking about the old pipes we had out back? I just want to tell you I found those old pipes. That's not old business. That's a report. That's a report about stuff in the past. But old business is specifically the motions, the business items that were on the table that haven't been resolved. They've been tabled, right? So when you come down to the old business section of any agenda, it really should be any business items that were tabled or not finished, right?
Sure.
So, which is reasonable, right? Sometimes we just need to check. Let's table this until we can consult with, whatever, totally reasonable. Robert's rule says, look, if that works for you, then that works for you. You can do it that way. If that motion dies, right, then it's done. It's done. There's no going back to it. It's done, right? And what Robert's rules says is, when the will of the body council makes a decision, that's done. It's finished. So one of the beauties of following Robert's rules is that if you have an issue, Jake, you want action on that, you want an answer on that, you have every right to put a motion on the table. And that motion has to be decided upon. It can't be just languished and people just shake their heads, whatever, and just move on to some other business, right? So that's the beauty of working motions to your advantage. It's like, you know what? I want something done. I'm going to put it on the table in the form of a motion. We may have to sort of work it out and maybe talk about this and maybe amend the emotion a few times or whatever. But the final motion that we're going to vote on, and we will vote on it one way or another, right, is the action that I want to see take place, right? That doesn't happen at our council meetings very often. They just, people talk about ideas and they talk about, action, this or that, but then it devolves into often no action.
Right.
Or just, we'll take this up later or whatever, right? You can get it, you can nip that in the bud by using this motion process to
It
your
seems
advantage.
like you should be able to nip it in the butt when you do this. But also, when we make a motion and nothing happens, it seems like there's no repercussions. When
Yeah.
there's a motion on the table and something is said to be done and then it's not done, and then we come up with excuses, and there's no, it doesn't seem like there's any repercussions.
Yeah, that's a real problem, right? You can make motions, but if no one follows through on the job or that motion, That's basically the chair's job, is to whip these actions, to follow through and make sure that the motions as passed get carried out, right? There should be no come back a month later and a motion was put on the table and no one knows anything about anything. There should
Right.
never be any of that, right? So, and it does come down to this, and you kind of just zero in on it: accountability, right?
Right.
If you have a chair that will not conduct business meetings through motions, or follow through on motions, or take them seriously, you know what you have to do? You have to remove that chair. Now, the borough code says that the council president serves at the pleasure of council, which means that at any meeting, majority vote, you can remove the present chair. It's really not rocket science, right? You put something on the table, it gets seconded, right? There's discussion, and then someone calls the question, and that motion gets voted up or gets down, or may get amended, right? Then it gets either voted up, voted down, or tabled for another time. It's totally not rocket science, and it just really makes me shake my head when I see these issues that just keep going around and around and around and around. And people have good ideas. I mean, don't get me wrong. You might have some good ideas from this chair and some good ideas from that chair and over here, right? And so, you know what? If you put a motion on the table, in that discussion, that might be the chance for those ideas to come together and make a little bit of amendments and changes, to something. And at the end of the day, you might just have a motion that everyone can live with, and then you call the question and you vote on it.